So in this one, we're going to take a look at Module 60, and we're going to take a look at some of the problems at the end of that section. So there are two check your understanding problems, and problem number one says, which of the following events will induce firms to enter an industry, what will induce an exit, and when will it cease, and explain your answers. So there's quite a bit actually in these four A, B, C, D. So a technological advance lowers the fixed cost of production of every firm in the industry. So if there's a decreased costs, right, decreased costs, therefore you're going to see an increase in the supply, and that's because, right, increase in the supply, so therefore an increase in the number of firms, right, is what we would say, increase in the number of firms in the long run, because the lower costs would increase profit in the short run. So for each of these, the easiest way to think about it is like, what is it going to do to the profitability conditions of the firms in the short run? And then what will happen to the number of firms in the long run? So if there's lower costs as a result of that technological advance, then there's going to be more profit in the short run. In response to that, there will be an increased number of firms. So part B says a wages paid to workers go up for an extended period of time. So costs go up. So we can actually say the intermediate step here, and we would say that profit goes down, lower profit in the short run. So firms will exit, right? So firms will exit. And we will know that firms will keep exiting until that profitability goes to zero, right? Because this would be like losses in the short run. We'd say that firms are in losses in the short run. And firms will keep exiting until enough of them exit that the price rises back up and makes all of them earn a normal profit again. A little bit easier with a graph, but C, a permanent change in tastes increases demand for the goods. So increase demand, therefore in the short run, therefore there's an increase in profit in the short run. And that's because the price went up of the good, right? So the price increases as a result of that higher demand. So there's more profit in the short run. So firms, number of firms enter. So the number of firms go up, and they keep entering until, right, the price drops, right? And so we know that once firms enter, the supply will rise, the price will fall. That's going to cause firms to keep entering until they go back to that normal profit. D, the price of an input rises due to long-term shortage of that input. So that's going back to higher costs. So higher costs, therefore lower profit, right, in the short run. Profit in the short run, therefore firms will exit. And we know that they'll keep exiting until the profit goes back to zero, to that normal profit. Number two. So number two is asking us to construct actually a couple of graphs, and it says construct a figures similar to figure 60.3 and show what happens in the egg industry. It goes from perfectly competitive in the long-run equilibrium with a perfectly elastic long-run industry supply curve, and health concerns about cholesterol lead to a decrease in demand. Show the short-run behavior of the industry and how long-run equilibrium is reestablished. So the figure 60.3 has three graphs. There's kind of three panels is a way to think about it. And with these three graphs, you have quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. And what's going to happen is, right, in this graph here is the easiest way to do it, would show you like what's the firm look like. That's the marginal cost and the ATC, and this is the ATC. They were in this long-run equilibrium. And there is a decrease in demand that occurs when that happens. So one way to think about it is like you have this demand curve for the firm, right? And the demand curve, they used to be here, right? They used to be, we can actually just say that they were at like zero. Or actually, just to make this easy, we'll say it's like quantity A. And then when the demand falls, Mr. DARP goes down to D1. When that happens, they're now going to produce where MR equals MC here at quantity B, right? So they're going from A to B, A to B. And then panel B is going to show what happens, right? What happens in the market. So this is the firm, and this is that market. Now, what we started with was a long-run kind of supply curve, long-run supply. But we also had over here, we had a supply curve in the short run that was upward sloping and a demand curve that was downward sloping. We did one of those. And it was setting that equilibrium price. So kind of going back over to that, that was setting that price. Then the demand fell to set that price. So the demand curve fell, so it went down, right? So we went from A to B in this one with that lower price. But in the long run, what starts to happen? Well, at B, at that quantity, the ATC is still way up here, so the firm is earning a loss because ATC is higher than the price. Excuse me. So firms will earn a loss at point B because ATC is higher than the price. If that happens in the market, when firms are earning losses, right, we know that when losses are occurring, profit is down, firms will exit. Firms will exit. And so when that occurs, we're going to get a new supply curve. The supply curve is going to shift to the left. There's fewer firms. And they'll keep shifting left until it comes back up to that point, to the original level of that long-run supply. Right? So it'll keep coming right back up until you get to that point. And that means that the Mr. DARP kind of does one of these. It comes down, goes to D1, and then it'll turn right back around again and come right back up again. So if we had over here, if we did kind of a little picture over here to show what happens in the long run, right? From the firm's perspective, they went from point A down to point B. That was when the demand fell. And then they go down, and then they go right back up again to point C. So A and C are basically the same point. So A to B to C. And so they come right back again to that long-run equilibrium amount. And so A and C end up being here. QA and QC are the same amount. So that's kind of that's the idea of that long-run adjustment. In the long run, the number of firms will change in response to that profitability condition, and they'll move right back to where they started again over here. So assuming that this firm didn't close. Now we're going to take a look at the multiple choice questions. And again, there are 5 of them. So the first multiple choice question says, in the long run, a perfectly competitive firm will earn, and at this point we should know, a normal profit, right? An earning normal profit, or zero economic profit. Number 2, with perfect competition, efficiency is generally attained in, and then it says, it gives you some choices, in the short run but not the long run, in the long run but not the short run, both the short run and the long run, neither, or specific firms only. So efficiency is generally attained, and the book here, it says that the answer is in the long run but not the short run. And that's because in the short run, you might have a scenario where firms are losing money, right? In the short run scenario, that's inefficient. And you might not have quite as many firms, or you might have too many firms, or you might not have enough firms in a short run. But in the long run, it'll move back to that level of point C, and firms will earn a normal economic profit. So we would say that in the long run, efficiency is attained, but not necessarily in the short run. B. 3. Compared to the short-run industry supply curve, the long-run industry supply curve will be more elastic, inelastic, steeply sloped, profitable, or accurate. And so again, looking up here, the long-run industry supply curves that we're going to deal with are going to be constant cost industries. And the book gives you some examples of increasing and decreasing cost industries, which are very interesting, but they're not necessarily going to be important for our purposes. But either way, even if it's an increasing cost industry, that supply curve isn't going to be perfectly horizontal. It'll just be tilted just up just a little bit. So I'd do one of these. But it's still not going to be quite as inelastic as the supply curve. So compared to the short-run industry supply curve, the long-run industry supply curve is always going to be more elastic, A. And again, part of the reason, if you're wondering why that has to be, like why is that true, is that the long run allows more time for firms to adjust their production levels. So, they're able to find inputs, they're able to find substitutes for the inputs, and they're able to open new facilities. In the long run, they're much more elastic, and they're able to respond to changes in prices by changing the quantity that they produce. In the short run, it's a lot harder for them to do that, so they have an upward sloping supply curve in the short run. Number 4, what's generally true in perfect competition? There's free entry and exit, that's true. So this is a 3-statement problem. Long-run market equilibrium is efficient, that is also true. And firms maximize profit at the output level where P equals MC. Well, we know that it's MR equals MC, but perfectly competitive firms, Mr. DARP holds true. So price is the same as marginal revenue. So the 3rd statement is also true, so this one is E, all of the above. Number 5. Which of the following will happen in response to if a perfectly competitive firms are earning positive economic profit? Well, we know up here, right, if there's profit that's occurring, then firms will enter, right? They'll enter in response to that. So let's see, firms will exit. No. Short-run industry supply curve will shift right. We'll think about that one for a second. The short-run industry supply curve will shift left. Think about that one for a second. Firm output will increase, not necessarily, right? Firms won't necessarily change their amount of output in response to earning a profit. They're always going to produce where MR equals MC. And market price will increase. That's not necessarily true as a result of them earning a profit. The short-run industry supply curve is just the regular market supply curve, right? This market supply curve. And so if firms are earning a profit here, we know that firms will enter. And if there are more sellers of a product, that means that the supply curve, right, will shift to the right. You'll end up with a rightward shift. And that means the short-run industry supply curve is increasing or shifting to the right, B. So the correct answer there, B. Now we're going to tackle the test FRQ number 2. FRQ number 2. And this one is saying that we actually need to do quite a bit. Draw correctly labeled side-by-side graphs for a firm and the market in long-run equilibrium, and then there's a whole bunch of things to label. Then there's a decrease in demand and show on the graphs, and then suppose the market adjusts to a long run. So we're going to start with a nice picture here, nice big picture here and here for quantity and price and price. And we're going to make this side the market and this side the firm. So we're going to start with demand and supply. Okay, demand and supply. And then it says that this is a perfectly competitive increasing cost industry. Now, for the purposes of our class, you don't actually have to do increasing cost industries. We could assume that they're all constant costs. But what it means is that as more firms enter, if it's an increasing cost industry, as more firms enter, their costs are going to go up because there aren't an unlimited number of the inputs for it. So if you have more and more firms, then they're all competing for the same inputs, it's going to drive the price of the inputs up. And that's probably a more realistic scenario that most companies operate in. There are some decreasing cost industries that are kind of unusual, but you can look in the book and think about those. Electric batteries for electric cars as an example. So for this one, though, it asks us to say that there's going to be an increasing cost industry. So it's going to be a little wonky for it. But here's how we're going to do this. And to start off, basically, you draw another supply curve going through here. That's the long-run supply curve, right? And it's going to be an upward sloping one. This is our short-run supply curve, and we'll just kind of know that. But the long-run supply curve is going to be upward sloping to illustrate that increasing cost in the long run as more firms enter in the market. So the long-run supply curve is going to be upward sloping, but less so than that short run. So then it says to go ahead and label the market equilibrium price and quantity as QM1 and PM1. So here you have QM1 and PM1, right? And then it says the side by side, so we need a firm. So we're going to take that price and go all the way over to here, right? Go all the way over to here. And that's going to be our demand curve for the firm's products. Demand curve for the firm's products. It's the Mr. DARP, right? That demand curve for the firm's products. And we're going to need a marginal cost curve. Whoops, that was kind of wonky. And we're going to want an ATC curve. Come down and come back up again. Now that ATC curve is going to correspond right here, and we're going to be earning a normal profit because it tells us they're perfectly competitive and they're in a long-run equilibrium. So it says label them MC1, right? MC1, average total cost ATC1, and demand for the firm as DF1, and then the price and quantity as QF1 and PF1. So this is just PF1, and then this is QF1. Now part B, suppose that an increased reliance on digital communications causes a decrease in the demand for paper. Show on the graph the new price and quantity in the market and the new short-run profit maximizing price and quantity in the firm. So if there's a decrease in demand, right, we're going to shift the demand curve to the left, decrease in demand, and it says to, it doesn't tell us what we're going to label those, but I'm just going to call it D2, right? And we're going to call that one D1. So there's a decrease in demand, okay, and our new equilibrium in the short run is where that short run industry supply curve and the short run demand curve is. Okay, so that's going to be right here. And that's going to be QM2 and then PM2. Right? So the price drops pretty dramatically. The quantity drops also as well. And that's going to generate for us a new PF value. PF1, or sorry, this is now PF2, is the price falls. New Mr. Darp, so DF2. And it says that we also need to label the new price and quantity for the firm. So we'll say the new price and quantity for the firm, MC equals MR, because this is the MR as well, right? And this is just MR number 2. So the new point where they produce is MR equals MC is here. QF2. And notice that the firm reduces the quantity that it produces. Right? It reduces the quantity that it produces. And it has to take the lower price that the market generated. Now, suppose the market and the representative firm, we're moving on part C, have adjusted to the new long-run equilibrium. And so what's going to happen, right, what's going to happen here is label the new equilibrium price and quantity, PM3, QM3, and then it's going to say explain how the representative firm's ATC differs from ATC1. So we don't have to draw a new ATC. And it says draw the long-run supply curve and label it LRS, which we already did that part, actually. So we already did LRS. So if they adjust, right, if they adjust, we know that actually firms, because ATC is way up here, we know that firms are losing money. Because if price is less than ATC, therefore a loss, right? So if the firms are losing money, then firms are going to exit. And firms are going to keep exiting, right? This supply curve is going to shift to the left, and firms are going to keep exiting until they go to that LRS. Okay? So this is going to be more like kind of S3 is one way to think about it. So we're going to have an even lower quantity, QM3. It's going to shift to the left again in terms of quantity. And the firms, like I said, that this is happening because they're shifting to the left. There's fewer firms until it gets back to that long-run supply. Now, the new price, right, is where S3, the short-run industry supply curve, and the demand curve intercept each other. So that's going to be right here, and we're going to call that PM3. So the price goes back up a little bit. Now, why does the price go back up and the quantity falls? That's because the supply curve shifted to the left. When there's a decrease in the short-run industry supply, this is from Unit 1, when there's a decrease in supply, the price will go up, and the quantity should go down. So now we've got a new price. We're going to carry that one all the way over to here, push that one back over here, and we're going to call that DF3, which is the marginal revenue 3, and we're going to call that PF3. And right, the new quantity is going to be in between these. So we're going to kind of say in there is QF3. So the firm will actually get, this firm will get to increase its production, right? So between QF3 and QF2 and QF3, the quantity actually increased. Now, why did that happen? Over here in the market, the quantity decreased. It went from QM2 to QM3. Over here, the quantity increased. It went from QF2 to QF3. How could that happen? Well, it happened because there were fewer firms. So it'd be like basically this firm is one of the lucky survivors, right? We know that a bunch of firms exited. That's what caused that leftward shift. But when that happened, the remaining firms, including this one, got to divide up the customer base among themselves. And so the number of their quantity, the ones who remain, increases. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's going to end up happening. Now the last part that it asks is explain how and why the representative firm's new ATC differs from ATC1. And it doesn't ask us to draw it. But what ends up happening, right? What ends up happening is notice that we've moved to a lower LRS point, right? That's important. We have lower costs now because there's fewer firms. So what will actually happen is you'll get a new ATC that comes down and goes back up again, called ATC3. And I know that's kind of hard to see because of how I'm drawing it, but basically the ATC curve is going to shift down, and it's happening because you're moving down that LRS curve. So in moving down the LRS, your ATC will decrease because when the size of the increase in cost industry goes down, the resulting decrease in demand for inputs will lead to a decrease in the cost of the inputs. So ATC should fall for this firm. So this was quite a lot of stuff. I can barely fit it on one page, but I hope that it helps you understand Module 60, and I'll see you next time.